Clifford Young, political science professor at Texas A&M's Bush School and Pollster. Thank you so much and welcome to Ion Politics.
It's great to be here.
Nice to see you. So, as you know, in the Texas Senate race right now, a variety of polls, including yours, showed that this is pretty much a dead heat between Democrat James Talarico and Republican Ken Paxton. How do you see this shaking out so far?
Well, we're pretty far out from Election Day, and so voters still aren't paying attention. They're not pining away about politics at this point. But I think the initial polling suggests it'll be a close race. It suggests, especially Talarico has some strengths and Paxton has weaknesses. How those shake out over the course of the campaign is another question. But right at this moment, Texans are saying it's 50-50.
And I wanted to ask you about in the Texas Senate race this week, we saw both candidates in South Texas. So Paxton was at a rally in McAllen, and Talarico's been touring the entire southern border from El Paso all the way down to Brownsville, I believe. And so I wanted to ask you just how important is South Texas and the border region as a whole in this election in the fall?
Well, it's critically important, obviously. I see it as a canary in the coal mine. Indeed, in 24, the critical issue was the border. Republicans and Trump took Texas, really carried Latinos much more strongly than in past races because of that issue. And so the critical question today is, what are those issues that are really weighing on Texans in general and Texans in the South? And it is affordability. Those are that more specifically making ends meet are the critical issues. Obviously, there are border concerns, but really this electoral cycle is about economics. It's about household income and making ends meet.
Democrats I spoke with think they're going to do very well with Latinos. They point to the March primary and the Latino turnout there. And do you agree with that? Do you think that the Democrats have a shot of, taking back some of the Latino vote away from Republicans?
Yeah, it's hard to say, obviously, at this point, but what we do know is that Latinos are voicing their frustrations around, again, affordability. It's a much more important issue than the border. The border was critical once again in 2024. Talarico and Democrats more generally have an advantage on affordability. So yes, I could see Latinos breaking more this electoral cycle for the Democrats than not. What is the size of that break? That's another question. But ultimately, the critical issues of the day, favor more Democrats than Republicans.
What about immigration enforcement? I mean, we've seen a lot of controversy since ICE and the deadly shootings we saw earlier in the year, and then again now in Houston and also in Maine. And just the fact of the sheer number of deportations. I know the president campaigned on that, but Latinos have expressed their frustrations on that, saying it's gone too far. So how big of a political impact will that have?
Yeah, I see the ICE events, the ICE issues, as more marginal in their effect. Things are happening. Obviously, they can be negative, they can be positive. It's creating more noise and friction than anything else. What's critical when it comes to the border issues is that Texans believe that the federal government, they believe that the Trump administration has done a good job at reducing the migrant flow. That sticks in the head of all Texans, whether they're red, blue, or purple. So I believe that's much more critical in framing how Texans see things than anything specific that can happen with ICE.
One thing that we've seen as far as his campaigns in campaign stops at the border, James Talarico has been running against the Biden administration. And Ken Paxton has pointed out that as a state lawmaker, he voted against numerous measures that state lawmakers passed for the state to get more involved and take a more active role in border enforcement. What do you make of that?
That's always a difficult position, a difficult message in any sort of campaign. So can be campaigning against the past or against your own party. You get few points that way. Really what we know, but just based upon the empirical experience, campaigns and candidates embrace the issues of the day, like affordability, tend to do better than thinking about the past. We'll see how it kind of like plays out. But I do think it opens up a sore spot for Talarico vis-a-vis Paxton.
And you talked about affordability before, and we have seen whether he's been campaigning up in the DFW area or other areas of the state, Talarico has been focusing much of his campaign on affordability and his positions, raising the federal minimum wage, increasing taxes on the wealthy, offering a federal health care program that competes with Medicare, not replacing, that competes rather with the private insurance market and not replacing it with a Medicare for all. So do you think those positions will resonate with Texans?
Yeah, I think in part. Obviously, we've seen them in other places in the United States have an effect. There's more economic populist policy and orientations, really cutting to the issue of affordability and the belief that the system is broken. The only difference between Texas and, let's say, other states, especially in the north, is that Texas is more Republican than not. So you'll get some inroads with that messaging, maybe not absolutely speaking because of the more conservative nature of Texas, but it makes sense given the primary issue of the day, affordability. It makes sense what the Talarico campaign is doing.
And does Ken Paxton need to start talking more about what he's going to do for voters?
Yes, obviously, he wants to be aligned with the critical issues of the day. In first place, it's affordability. In second place, obviously, it's the border and border issues. Obviously, he has more problems aligning with the primary issue because his party is in power. They're always in a more problematic place when the economy is not 100%. I think they also will go after character issues. We've already seen that. Painting Talarico as different, as off diagonal as socialists. I think that's what they're doing as well. So yeah, I believe obviously he needs to align with those critical issues. It's just more difficult for Paxton than it is for Talarico today.
And that's because of his baggage and because of the fact that the Republican Party, President Trump is in power and his poll numbers are down, and historically the midterms help the party that's not in the White House. Is that right?
Exactly. So the party in power, both at the federal level and the state level, tends to do poorly when the economy is not doing well. And so, yes, you should align. You should talk about those issues, but it's just kind of a historical or empirical fact that you typically don't do as well. For Paxton, obviously, he has to align in part, have some solutions there, but ultimately talking about the border, talking about immigration, talking more about the cultural issues, painting Talarico as different as a socialist, as a social democrat, which are all sort of naughty words among Republicans and Republican-leaning individuals, is probably what he's more likely to do.
So does he basically have to go all negative against Talarico to pull this out?
Yeah, I think that in the grand scheme of things, the issues are not in his favor. And so therefore, going negative and going ad hominem, going to the individual, probably is more likely to be his strategy. Obviously, they have the issue of the border and immigration. They can double down on that, but that's not the critical issue of the day. So yes, you're right.
But he also has to talk about affordability, though, right? He's got to do kind of two things, right? I mean, is it going to work this year to go all negative, or are people just going to not really care about that?
Well, at the very base, he's going to have to talk about affordability. He's going to have some thinking around it. The point I was hammering home is he's just going to be less credible in this electoral cycle than normal because he is the party in power. So yes, he needs to talk about the critical issues of the day. One, affordability, and two, the border. But that doesn't necessarily only get him across the finish line. He's going to have to go negative. We're already seeing that in part.
And he is facing some headwinds just in negative headlines in the last couple of weeks. We saw videos that pop up on social media and in some press reports of him in England on July 4th with his girlfriend. And how troubling is that? Plus, he's also faced headlines, a story from ProPublica and the Texas Tribune, in which they reported that he had voted 6 times at a polling location tied to his former home in Collin County. How troubling are those, and can he get past those?
Yeah, those are all negative, potentially negative proof points that can be used by the Talarico campaign, can be used by political operatives. Obviously, it goes to his character. We already know based on polling, he polls more negatively on character than Talarico. Talarico is actually in a strong place. That's one of his strong suits. Paxton less so. So all this kind of goes to ultimate electability. Obviously, this is why we're seeing a very close race. We're seeing a very close race because, on the one hand, the issues are not in favor of the Republicans today, but on the other, Paxton has liabilities, has image liabilities, which you pointed out, and they will be exploited, obviously, during the campaign.
Does Talarico have his own headwinds as far as what the Republicans are trying to do and point out all of his past comments on video for everybody to see, as far as his comments on six genders, God not being binary, non-binary, as far as don't eat meat because, we want to help the planet, that kind of thing. I mean, how troubling are those for Talarico?
And they're problematic, obviously, and especially in a state like Texas, which tends to be more conservative than the average. Obviously, this is a playbook not just in Texas for Republicans. This is a playbook nationally, trying to paint candidates on the left, trying to paint Democrats as being far lefties, as being social Democrats. We're hearing this all day, every day across the United States. I don't know if it's more problematic than any other sort of race, but without a doubt, Republicans will try to paint him as such, as being off diagonal, as being very different, as being un-Texan, let's say, as being extremely liberal. And that's really sort of probably the strongest suit in the Republican quiver this electoral cycle.
So, what will it take to move the needle for either candidate?
I think we're talking about a game of inches. I think it's going to be about setting aside events. Something happens, some sort of video appears, right, that changes the minds of Texans. It needs to be. It will be a game of inches, meaning the efficiency of the campaigns. Can, on the one hand, the Paxton campaign be efficient and focus on these liabilities that they see, social and political, when it comes to Talarico? And can Talarico hammer home the affordability issue? Are they efficient about it? Barring any sort of major event that could change the dynamic, change the calculus, I think we're talking about game of inches and really efficient campaigns.
Couple of other questions. We've seen reports of some Republicans who supported John Cornyn uh, may not vote for Paxton. They either will sit it out or they may vote for Talarico. How troubling is that, and what does Paxton need to do to convince them to come home?
Yeah, that's, you always have to be careful about elite endorsements. They usually only represent one vote. Obviously, you don't want it. You want your entire ecosystem, those that are supporting you in your milieu, let's say, to be aligned with with you. I wouldn't chalk it off too much. I think it's already baked into the numbers. The very fact that we have a tied race at this point in Texas for Senate, I think says it all.
And then my last question is just talk about the fundraising numbers. We saw Ken Paxton raise $9 million in the second quarter, while Talarico raised $30 million. Huge numbers. So, what do you make of that, and what impact will that have on the race? We've seen Democrats, Beto O'Rourke back in 2018, had a sizable advantage over Ted Cruz when it came to fundraising, and yet Cruz still pulled it out. I don't know if that will happen this time around. for Paxton?
Yeah, I think we always have to be careful with funding of campaigns. They're not really a strong leading indicator of what happens. You just need enough money to get across the finish line, and whether you have a little bit more is less important. Now, that said, Talarico is a figure that generates a lot of energy, a lot of excitement. A lot of that money is from Texas, but it also comes from outside. I think the relative advantage that he has to Paxton is also a function of the fact that Paxton does have liabilities. The very fact that you might have some senior politicos in Texas not supporting him kind of goes much less to the polling itself or the likelihood of winning, and much more to whether you could bring in those donors when you need to. So I think the difference we see is sort of the difference in energy that each of the respective candidates brings to the table.
I did have one other question. It goes to, I guess, the energy that you just mentioned, and that is the midterm convention that Republicans are holding in Dallas. President Trump coming and said he's going to be campaigning for Paxton. How critical is that for Paxton that this convention goes well and gets the Republicans here in Texas energized to go out and vote for him?
Yeah, we don't have much experience with midterm conventions, right? That typically happen at the presidential election in the presidential cycle. They do have bumps. Each respective convention, Democrat and Republican, helps their respective candidates. This can't hurt, obviously, being in Dallas. I think Trump being in Texas helps. He polls still well in Texas, especially compared to the rest of the United States. Texans recognize what he's done for the border. So obviously it's a net neutral to net positive for Paxton having Trump here in Texas.
Clifford Young, pollster and political science professor at Texas A&M's Bush School. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
We appreciate it.